The president makes his speech in the Rose Garden and puts up the board with the tariffs. And I want to know what you were thinking as you were watching that.
Well, first I was trying to figure out where the numbers came from because it wasn't exactly self-evident. But look, there's obviously a case for tariffs that are very targeted, discrete, focused on real problems, real issues, including what the president did during his first term in putting the focus on China.
Right.
And now we've got a huge problem with Chinese overcapacity, trying to dump things on our markets and push our people out of business. That's exactly where it makes sense to use tariffs. But what really struck me was, of course, this wasn't focused on that problem. This was global tariffs, including against the very countries that we need to be with us to deal with a problem like the problem posed by China. So that's what first struck me. This seemed to be America against the world, not America taking on discrete problems that do require
Have you gotten phone calls from your former counterparts, if you will, abroad after this to say, you know, what am I supposed to do? How should I deal with this?
I've gotten a lot of phone calls. All I can tell you, though, is I'm not in the business of giving foreign leaders advice. But folks who called me, former colleagues, I certainly listened to what they were saying. And Andrew, here's the problem. Look, it may.
What are they saying?
So, first of all, if they're allies, or maybe in some cases former allies, they're aghast at the United States going at them. And what I'm hearing is that here's I think the real challenge. It's possible that in some of these instances there'll be a negotiation and maybe something concrete and positive will develop. But the message that this is sent to countries around the world, including some of our closest allies and partners, is we need to move away from the United States. We can't rely on the United States. We've got to work around the United States. So we're going to be doing more with each other, and in some cases, more with China. You now have the EU trade reps meeting with their Chinese counterparts. The South Koreans and Japanese, for the first time in 5 years, meeting with their Chinese counterparts. So my concern is that this is pushing countries that we need with us to deal with a lot of challenges away from us and maybe even toward China.
How do you see the negotiations with China itself playing out? The president has now talked about effectively tariffs that could get ratcheted up to 104% effectively of the price tag of things that are being imported into our country.
Well, this is an extraordinary game of chicken because I think it's very hard for Xi Jinping to back down or be seen as backing down. So they're going to have to find some way out of this spiral.
They are or we are?
In effect, I think both of us, because I think this heads to a very bad place. Last time around, the President struck a deal with China. China vowed to buy a lot of stuff from us. They never actually did, in part because of COVID, maybe in part because they weren't going to follow through, but there was an off-ramp. There needs to be some other kind of off-ramp here that allows Xi Jinping to do what he needs to do to cover himself politically, but also get some kind of result that the President can point to. But again, I come back to this proposition. Look, when we're dealing with China alone, and there are many unfair trade practices that everyone's very familiar with, the overcapacity problem is real, especially on cutting-edge technologies. But when we're dealing with China alone, we're what, 20% of world GDP? When we're aligned, as we were just a few months ago, with partners in Europe, partners in East Asia, we're 50 or 60% of world GDP. A lot harder for China to ignore. That's the way to get results. So I'm afraid that, you know, we're heading to a place where instead of it being America first, it's America alone.
Right. Scott Bessent effectively said that China doesn't have the cards, that we have the leverage. Do we?
China's has some real challenges. We all know them. On the other hand, look at what's happening. The massive investments that China is making in its own R&D, in its own technologies, in its own research, at a time when, unfortunately, we're also pulling back from that, I think is also going to stand us in bad stead going forward. You walk around any research university in this country where the innovation happens, and it's like going into the United Nations. Right. As we start to move away from that, as we make life more difficult, as grants dry up from the government, as people stop coming here, China's making it more and more attractive for people to go there or to stay there. So they have real cards to play. And here's what's happening.
They do.
They're presenting themselves as the responsible actor. They're presenting themselves as the country that is for free trade, that is for normal economic relations with other countries. And of course, there's a big fiction there because of all the unfair practices they're engaged in. But by comparison, it presents a problem for us.
Just finally on the off-ramp issue, for the China-U.S. conversation, whatever that is, I imagine President Xi needs to save some kind of face,
Yep.
but President Trump's going to want to be able to proclaim that he won something.
That's right.
So if you were to think about what that ultimately looks like, what is it? And
Well,
when you think about the various sort of chess pieces, TikTok, for example, how do you use these pieces?
Look, you may be able on TikTok to cut a deal whereby the Chinese allow something to go ahead so that there's new effective ownership of TikTok, or at least the algorithm, which is really what's key. Maybe that's part of the deal.
Do you think that they will release the algorithm? Because part of this whole issue is we, the U.S., have said over and over again that this is a national security
That's right.
threat. And so if you make a deal without the algorithm...
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Look, there are a variety of places where this could go. It could mean the Chinese buying more stuff. It could mean them ending some of the overcapacity practices they've been in, where they're swamping a community with underpriced stuff that pushes our businesses out of business and does grievous harm to our own communities. It could be something along those lines, but there has to be something that works for both of them. And to something that you'd appreciate, we're both too big to fail.
Right. In your last speech, in your role as Secretary of State, you talked about Germany and Japan being our closest allies. Yeah. We are now apparently in some form of negotiation or conversation with Japan over these tariffs. Mm-hmm. What do you think the relationship ultimately looks like after this? And do you think that the toothpaste is out of the tube, that the relationship has fundamentally changed at all for countries where we were allies or are allies, whether it's Germany or Japan or the UK, given what's happened here even just the past week?
Look, one of the most extraordinary developments over the last 80 years, which in the sweep of human history is not a lot, is the fact that over the last 4 years when I was on the job, probably our two closest partners were Germany and Japan. That's an incredible story. The idea that we would put that in doubt is deeply disturbing.
Do you think it's genuinely in doubt, or do you think that this is something that can be walked back from?
Look, something has been, I think, irretrievably lost. Now, fundamentally, they still have strong interests, and we, of course, have a strong interest in both partnerships. But this question of trust, which is the foundation of the partnership, that has now been called into question. And so even if they think, well, maybe we'll get someone down the road who does business in something in a way that we're more used to, they really can't count on the fact that that's going to be enduring.
Right.
And putting that genie back in the bottle is going to be hard.
Just real quick, the art of the deal when it comes to tariffs. There's a real question mark of how long this could take. Yeah. Do you get a Bretton Woods style kind of deal where everybody gets involved? Are they all bilateral one-offs? Does this go on for months and months and months, in which case you have a paralysis in terms of investment? You have some leaders, I think, looking at our country saying, well, maybe I should wait, see what the courts say. Maybe the markets go down, and that puts pressure on, Republican members of the House and the Senate to put pressure on the president. How do you see these dynamics?
First, it would be good to know what the actual objective is, because I've heard a multiplicity of rationales for why we're doing this. Is it to raise revenue? Is it to bring manufacturing back to the United States? Is it to deal with trade imbalances? What is it? And we keep hearing different stories. So I think it would be very helpful for the administration to come forward and make clear what they're actually trying to do. Now, if this is about what the president has talked about for a long time, which is the sense that other countries, to quote him, are ripping us off,
right,
and the way he sees that is through trade imbalances, well, it's not at all clear to me that tariffs and trade imbalances are that closely connected. In fact, we have, if you look at the 27 countries in the European Union, right, they have the same tariffs, they have more or less the same trade policies. We've got trade surpluses with some, we have deficits with others. So we need to know, what is this actually about? What is the president trying to accomplish? Now, when there's unfairness, and when we're trying to correct that, good. We want to be strong, we want to use the right tools, but we've got to do it in a smart way. And the final thing is this. Look, maybe this lands in a better place, but meanwhile, people are getting hurt. We're going to see prices go up. We're going to see it more costly to export American goods at the same time. The people who are really going to bear the brunt of that will be consumers who are in the middle class and the lower class, for whom the price of basic things is going to go up. And for American manufacturers, Andrew, and you know this so well, yeah, Great, we want more American exports, except that so many of our exports have components that are coming from somewhere else. If their prices go up, our prices go up and we'll be less competitive.
Is there any way in your mind this could end well?
At this point, I think maybe there are some deals where there are egregious imbalances. Maybe they get corrected. But I am more than deeply concerned that the message that we've sent to the world is you can't count on, you can't trust America. And the net result of that is they'll be looking for ways to work around us, away from us, and that's not going to be good for us.
I want to pivot to Iran for just a moment. President Trump saying that the U.S. will have direct talks with Iran on Saturday, apparently to discuss a nuclear deal. Iran officials are saying that this is not going to be a direct conversation, it will be an indirect conversation. What do you think is really happening?
Well, first, if there are talks, whether they're direct or indirect, I applaud that, because it's good if we're talking, and it's good if we're trying to do something about the nuclear program. My sense is that President Trump would like a deal. He'd prefer to get a deal than to have to use military means. One, he doesn't want another war. Two, military means in dealing with their nuclear program less effective than actually having a durable agreement. And we had that agreement. We had the agreement that President Obama reached. We had their nuclear program in a box. Unfortunately, President Trump tore it up. At the time, he said that he was going to produce a better deal. He didn't. Now there's an opportunity. And why is there an opportunity? Because Iran is at its weakest point in a long time. Why is that the case? In large part because of the work that we were able to do with Israel, both to protect Israel from the attacks that it endured from Iran, bringing together a whole coalition of countries, including in the region, to defend Israel, and also to work with Israel on calibrating its response so that it took out Iran's missile air defenses, and it put Iran in the weakest position. Iran's lost its proxies in Hezbollah, in Hamas, in Assad in Syria. This is the moment for a deal, and I hope that the president seizes it.
When you think about Israel and you think about getting the hostages back, and this is something I know you worked so very hard on, how much credit do you think you and the Biden administration deserve? How much credit do you believe that the Trump administration deserves for the hostages that came back on during his tenure?
Well, look, I'm more than happy to share the credit, because the most important thing is the result that we had for 6 weeks. Hostages back, conflict held in abeyance, Palestinians getting the assistance that they so desperately need. It's a wonderful thing that happened after so much trauma, so much tragedy, so much suffering. Now, the deal itself was the deal that President Biden put out there. We negotiated. We got done, but I'm glad we worked actually very closely with Steve Witkoff in the end to get it over the finish line. But here's the problem. That produced a 6-week ceasefire. It got hostages back. But there had to be something that followed in order for that ceasefire to be enduring. We put down a plan, and we left a plan for the next administration for how to make it enduring. Bringing in the Arabs, bringing in other partners to try to fill the vacuum so that Israel could leave Gaza and Hamas wouldn't fill in. Unfortunately, more than unfortunately, tragically, that seems to have been dropped.
I want to ask you about Ukraine. Really, actually wanted to ask you, when you watched the press conference with President Trump and Vance and Zelensky, again, it's a similar question to maybe the Rose Garden ceremony. What were you thinking as you watched that unfold, given that you know all of these people so well?
Look, you know, we spent so much time, so much effort on working to defend Ukraine against this extraordinary onslaught from Russia. And the reason for that was twofold. One, you don't want to see a smaller nation bullied by a bigger one. I think Americans don't like that. But this was always bigger than Ukraine. It was really about the aggression not just against the Ukrainians, but against the principles that kind of underlie the international system, that one nation can't go in and change the borders of its neighbor by force. It can't pretend to dictate what that neighbor is going to do. And if we had allowed that to go forward with impunity, then it would have been a Pandora's box opened up around the world for every would-be aggressor who would have said, if Putin can get away with it, so can I. So it was so important that we stand strongly with Ukraine to prevent more conflict, to prevent more aggression. And we did that. Now there is an opportunity to get this to a better place, to a ceasefire. And if the president can do that, great. But here's what it requires. It requires making sure that if there is a ceasefire, that the Ukrainians have the means to deter future Russian aggression. Because one thing I can tell you for sure, Putin's not given up on his ambitions to erase Ukraine from the map, to subsume it into Russia. He'll rest, he'll refit, and reattack if given the opportunity. So you've got to have deterrence built in. You've got to have real protection. That can be done in a number of ways. The Europeans are willing, they've said, to put forces on a demarcation line, but they need backup from the United States.
So, people who watched that press conference, it was almost like a Rorschach test. Some people looked at that and said that Zelensky was effectively goading Vance and goading Trump into this, and others felt that it was the opposite, that it was Vance goading Zelensky. What did you see?
Look, I think whichever way it is, we shouldn't be in the business of goading each other, and/or we shouldn't be in the business of taking the bait if goading is going on, because the stakes are too great for that. Look, did we have frustrations occasionally with our Ukrainian friends, including President Zelensky? Sure. Did we show that in public when it happened? No, because it's so important that there be a clear united front. And you can't lose sight of the fundamental, which is there's an aggressor, and that's Russia. There's a victim, and that's Ukraine. And it's unfortunate that the focus got taken off of that and on
Fair to ask for or try to take rare earth minerals or other kinds of remuneration for our help.
Yes, and in fact, part of the victory package that President Zelensky put on the table in the last 6 months of our administration included us working with them on rare earths, on critical minerals. And we'd been trying to drive investment in Ukraine, including in that sector, for many months, and it would be something that would be beneficial to our companies. But what I think we saw put forward in the deal that was proposed was basically a protection racket without the protection. We want all of this stuff, but you're really not going to get much for it in terms of protection against Russia from us.
Okay, one or two more. Signalgate. What did you think? Well, as somebody who lives this, who knows this, who's been on various chains and threads before, how concerned were you?
Very concerned, because as I saw it, this was using Signal, among other things, to share very active operational plans. And
is the problem using Signal, or is the problem who was on the list? Meaning, should all of those people been getting this kind of information in real time this way?
Look, it may be that there were 1 or 2 or 3 people who arguably shouldn't have been on it. No, it was using Signal. And look, everyone wants to be able to communicate effectively in real time. I get that. I know that. And most of us, I used to have in my home a secure room, so that if I was not in the office and if I needed to have a secure call like the one they were on via Signal, I'd be able to do that. We've got phones in our cars that are secure. And yeah, there's a little bit more of a burden in not being able to pull your phone out of your pocket and get on Signal. You have to go to a secure location. But I would say that the burden on our F-16 pilots, who are carrying out the hard work of securing the country, is a little bit greater than that. And the folks who have to protect them by maintaining secrecy just need to focus on doing that.
And finally, what have you thought of Doge and what Elon Musk has been doing, whether it touches USAID, which is something obviously that I imagine you touched in your old role?
Look, can government work more efficiently? Of course. Are there savings to be had? Of course. Do we need to look at that? Sure. But to do it with a 2x4 instead of a scalpel, to do it in a way that just shoots first and maybe asks questions later, I don't think is the way to do it. I know it's not the way to do it. And look, I know that, politically, people would love to see some of us out there trying to defend government, trying to defend foreign assistance, because they know the American people may not be so enamored of that. But here's the reality. AID. I went around the world for 4 years, more than that, in previous jobs. And the one thing that I saw in country after country was the powerful impact that AID was having in bettering people's lives. Now, it's
some people say that was a charity. I mean, they look at the items and they'd say, Sesame Street in Iraq, why are we doing that?
Yeah. So 2 things. First, it's 1 penny on every dollar, right? You ask Americans how much they think we're spending on foreign assistance. They say, oh, we're probably spending 25% of the budget. What should we be spending? 10%. What are we actually spending? 1%. So it's not a lot, but the return on that in terms of our own well-being, our own security, is dramatic. When you're using that money to make sure that people might be a little bit better fed, that they can get a vaccine, that they have some opportunity in their lives, that makes it less likely that you're going to see a war break out. You're going to get a mass migration, maybe heading toward the United States, a pandemic that winds up biting us. All of those things have powerful positive impacts on the United States. And of course, the goodwill that it builds for us around the world is extraordinary. I saw that again and again. The thing, Andrew, that I feared the most in looking at the competition with China was the day that China would figure out soft power. And I thought that would really make them even more competitive with us. The idea that we would not only see China try to develop more soft power, that we would cede our own, again, not good for the country, not good for our interests.